Boker Tov, good morning. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Aliyah day on a new format. And Bezrat Hashem, this new format will work better. Normally, we've had the Aliyah day on Facebook Live, but recently been having a lot of trouble with the quality. So I'm praying that this will be a better format. And so we always have the Aliyah Day on the podcast. We have it on the Anchor podcast. It actually goes to various venues to be able to listen. All you have to do is go and Google Rabbi Mordecai Griffin podcast, and a slew of options will become available to you. You can listen to it on a number of different ways. So it's a new format. It's a new place. Welcome to the Lapid Judaism YouTube site. You're going to be seeing a lot more videos. If this works well, then you'll have the daily Aliyah here. We'll also share it to the Lapid Judaism Facebook page, and then we have the more and more teachings as well. I am Rabbi Mordecai Griffin, in case you are tuning in and you've never been here before, so welcome. I am the founder of Sar Shalom Synagogue, which is located in Saginaw, Texas, which happens to be a northern suburb of Fort Worth. And I am also the founder, the one who came up with the concept of Lapid Judaism, the Lapid movement. There is no other Lapid Judaism aside from what you're seeing right here. There is no other site. There is no other person. There is no other organization anywhere in the world. I am it, and actually, God gave me this concept for Lapid Judaism to be a sect of Judaism back in 2014, and so you'll see that we'll be talking more and more about that as we have more and more videos. But as many of you know, some of you who've been following for some time, we have been doing the Aliyah Day this year 5779 since Lech Lecha and Baruch Hashem. So prayerfully this will work. We are in the second Aliyah, as I said, of Parashah Chukat and the book of Numbers, the book of Bamidbar. If you have the Art Scroll Humash, prayerfully you do. We will be on page 841. We're talking about the mitzvah of the red cow and the different meanings therein. We looked at some insights yesterday. The second Aliyah takes us through the remainder of the discussion of this mitzvah in the Torah and into the issue with the lack of water at the death of Miriam. So we're going to get to that today and look at some insights, and Bezrat Hashem, it will bring down some incredible meaning to each and every one of us. So the second Aliyah begins in, as I said, chapter 19, the 18th verse. So we will read it in the Anglit, because the majority of people here read and speak Anglit. Some speak Spanish, and others speak French. But here we go. A pure man shall take hyssop and dip it into the water and sprinkle upon the tent and upon all the vessels, upon the people who were there, and upon the one who touched the bone, or the slain one, or the one that died, or the grave. The pure person shall sprinkle upon the contaminated person on the third day and on the seventh day, and shall purify him on the seventh day. Then he shall immerse his clothing and immerse himself in water and become purified in the evening. But a man who becomes contaminated and does not purify himself, that person shall be cut off from the midst of the congregation. If he shall have contaminated the sanctuary of Adonai, because the water of the sprinkling has not been thrown upon him, he is contaminated. This shall be for them an eternal decree. And the one who sprinkles the water of sprinkling shall immerse his clothing, and one who touches water of sprinkling shall be contaminated until evening. Anything that the contaminated one may touch shall become contaminated, and the person who touches him shall become contaminated until evening. So it says in chapter 20, now we move into chapter 20 for the remainder of the Aliyah reading. The children of Israel, the whole assembly, shall arrive at the wilderness of Zin in the first month, and the people settled in Kadesh. Miriam died there, and she was buried there. There was no water for the assembly, and they gathered against Moshe and Aaron. The people quarreled with Moshe and spoke up, saying, If only we had perished as our brethren perished before Adonai, Why have you brought the congregation of Adonai to this wilderness to die there, we and our animals? And why did you bring us up out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place, not a place of seed or fig or grape or pomegranate, and there is no water to drink? Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the congregation to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces. And it says, Kevod Adonai Elahechem, the glory of Adonai appeared to them. So, before we touch to that news story, let's go back and look at a few points here that got left on the table from yesterday's Aliyah. And again, if you are just now joining us and you're new to the Aliyah a day, and I see some of our faithful members have come over, so welcome to all of you who are normally watching on Facebook. If you want to catch up on the other Aliyot a day, then you can go to our actually the Sar Shalom Synagogue Facebook page, and that's where you can find those. Or, as I said, you can go to the podcast as well. So we looked yesterday at we talked at length about how this is considered or actually the rule of the Torah. I want to read another insight here from the Kehil Tumash that will bring some more clarity to this thought. It says, by calling this right, and we're talking here about the ashes of the red heifer, the fact that it's a hukah, that it is a mitzvah for which there is no rational understanding. I mean, we're talking about the ashes of the red heifer that are mixed with water and sprinkled on a person to make them pure, and yet it makes the person who is doing this impure. So it's seemingly a contradiction. We don't understand it, which is why, as we said yesterday, this is a rule of the Torah. What does this mean? It means that the very fact that we follow God without having to understand everything about him or about his word or about his the meaning therein, that is the rule of the Torah. The rule of the Torah is God is my God. We don't have the luxury, we don't have the right, you might say, to question him. Does it mean we can't question? Absolutely not. As I've said many, many times, a son is allowed and in fact encouraged to question his father, with the intention of learning. Some people question with the intention of arguing, and that's never good. If you're going to ask a question, then we want to have a question that has an intention of gaining some insight. But as I said, some people just want to question because they want to argue. We don't have time for those people. Not that we don't want to answer questions, but we don't have time for all these silly arguments. We want people who are hungry to learn, because there's so many people who are hungry for learning. We want to focus on them. But going back to the son-father analogy, the son is allowed and in fact encouraged to ask his father, Dad, why do we do this? Abba, what's the reason for this? Abba, what should I learn from this? But what he's not allowed to do is to disobey his father while he's asking, and he's not going to obey him until he understands why. Because that's how so many parents say, just do it because I said so. And we talk about that, we laugh about that, especially as we who are parents. Do this because I said so. Well, sometimes that's appropriate. Sometimes it is appropriate for us just to tell our children, do this because I said so, because maybe they're not at a point in their life where they can understand. They're not in a position in which your explanation is going to make sense to them. So therefore, they need to do it because it's the right thing to do. So we follow the Torah because it's God's will. Whether we understand or not is not really the determining factor. So it says here, by calling this right the rule of the Torah, rather than a rule of purity or the rule of the red cow, the Torah implies that there is something about it that is intrinsic to the Torah as a whole. There are indeed a number of lessons in this ritual that can apply to the entire Torah, but the most fundamental is the fact that it is a rule, an expression of God's will devoid of rationale. Since there is no rational reason for this rite, we observe it purely out of devotion to God's will. Similarly, we should follow all God's commands, even those for which there is no rationale, out of pure devotion to his will. For in truth, all God's commandments are expressions of his will, and therefore deserve our full unconditional commitment. It is just that the rational commandments have been garbed in rationality, while the others have not. So all of the commandments are an expression of Hashem's will. This is why the Mashiach was talking about what it means to love God. He said in the book of Yochanan, what it means to love God, and by extension, to love the Mashiach, is to obey the commandments. That's how we express love. In our world, love is being used right now in an extremely perverted way. The militant homosexual movement that has at its mission the LBGTQ 7 beta alpha, whatever they want to call it nowadays, is a militant missionary movement bent on encouraging everybody they can to become homosexual. And as someone said just recently, the reason they have to do that is because that's how they propagate their religion. And make no mistake, my friends, it is a religion, an extremely perverse religion, but a religion nonetheless. But how are they masking this? They're masking this perversion. They're masking this mental illness, because transgender and even homosexual, it's all mental illness. It's not normal. They mask it though in love, and so therefore people say, I support love, and really they have the multicolored banner, and they're marching up down the street with all this perversion. And they're saying, it's okay, I support love, and love sounds so good. We want love. We want to be people of love. God is love. All that stuff. It's a perversion. The reality is that the way in which we love God is to follow His will. That's a definition of love. So married couples can relate to this, because they do things for one another. They appreciate one another. They serve one another. They sometimes do things for the other person that they don't necessarily enjoy. For instance, maybe a husband will go shoe shopping with his wife, or maybe the wife will go shopping for fishing tackle with her husband. They don't necessarily enjoy that, but they're doing it. Why? Because it's the will of their spouse, and they love their spouse, and therefore they do it. This is how we love God. So it says, in fact, there is a reason for this right, but it is not an intellectual reason. It is not even based on God's intellect. It makes sense only in the overall context of God's will, which transcends intellect. Therefore, King Solomon, the wisest of all men, said of this right, I thought I could fathom it, but it eludes me. Even Solomon couldn't understand what God was saying. I enjoy shopping with you. My wife just said I enjoy shopping. I enjoy shopping with her. I do. Even shoe shopping. So it says here, he must take it outside the camp. Now, this is a wonderful insight. It says all other sacrifices must be offered inside the tabernacle precincts. Only this one is offered outside. This is because all other sacrifices atone for inadvertent sins, which we commit because our animal nature makes us careless about spiritual concerns. Since our animal nature can be refined and co-opted into holiness, we can offer the sacrifices that accomplish this inside the temple. The red cow, in contrast, it says here, is brought to purify us from the defilement of death, which cannot be refined or elevated. It must be totally annihilated. So the goal of the offering of the red cow is to annihilate death. I want you to really embrace that concept for a moment. The red cow must be entirely reduced to inedible ashes. It therefore has no place inside the tabernacle. My friends, this is precisely why Mashiach was taken outside the temple area in order to be crucified. This is precisely why, because his mission was not just to rid us of sin. His mission was not just to purify us. His mission ultimately, the mission of the Mashiach ultimately was to annihilate death. We had a discussion at Havdalah, and I want to share just an insight, just an idea. I'm not going to make a religion out of this because I don't know. It's an opinion. But everything that happens in the Bible happens for a reason. Every single letter, every single space between the letters, everything is for a reason. So you ask the question, why is it that Mashiach had to go, or why did he actually leave his Seder and go to the Garden of Gethsemane and pray? Why there specifically? Why didn't he go to the Temple Mount and pray? Why didn't he go to the market and pray? Why did he go to the Mount of Olives and the Garden of Gethsemane and pray there? I believe, it's my opinion, so, it is what it is, but my belief is that he went there because, first of all, the Mount of Olives was called the Mount of Atonement because that is where the red cow was burnt up. That's where all this took place, the Mount of Olives. So therefore, the Mount of Olives is called the Mount of Atonement, which is why the Mashiach made his ascension from there 40 days later, 10 days before Shavuos. But I also believe that the garden, see, the Temple Mount, where the Temple Mount is, and will be, maybe soon in our day, amen, is where the Garden of Eden was, and where the Tree of Life was, and in fact is, in another dimension, the dimension we cannot see with our natural eyes. And so the question is that's where the Tree of Life was, right there where the Holy of Holies is located. So where is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? And I submit to you, it's my opinion, I submit to you that the reason that the Mashiach had to go to the Garden of Gethsemane is because that is where the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was, and he had to be arrested at the scene of the crime. He had to be arrested at the scene of the crime outside the perimeters of the temple because he was going to be that offering that would annihilate death forever, which, my friends, is 100% a Jewish idea. Why do I say that? Because it's understood that the Messiah ben Yosef is going to die for the sins of Israel. And what does it mean to die for the sins of Israel? What does that mean? When you say die for the sins of Israel, what does that mean? It means the annihilation of death. Because if you remove sin, then you remove death, because the root of death is sin. This is why Mashiach said, I came to give you life and life more abundantly. He's not talking about just his sacrifice. He's talking about the fact that he is going to, as it says in the book of Ezekiel 3 times, he's going to purify us, which indicates that he's ultimately the red cow, or you know what I mean? He's ultimately the purification, right? He's going to purify us, but it doesn't stop there. He says he's going to give us a new heart. Okay, that's good. We're going to be new creations. That's all Jewish ideas. But what else does it say? It says he's going to cause us to walk in his commandments. That's the third step of the process. Purification, a new heart, a heart of flesh, not a heart of stone. In other words, a heart that wants to follow God. And step number 3 is he's going to cause us to walk in his commandments. That is a promise of Mashiach, of Hashem, actually, in the book of Ezekiel. And so therefore, if we are walking his commandments, the opposite of sin is obedience. Therefore, to walk in his commandments is therefore to walk in life rather than death. And thus, that is to have abundant life. If you really want to experience freedom and joy in your life, if you really want, listen to me, please. If you really want to experience freedom and joy in your life, then become a Torah true Jew. Become a Torah true Jew. I didn't say that life is going to be a bowl of cherries. I didn't say that it's going to be without its challenges. I said if you want to experience true freedom, and if you want to experience true joy, if you want to experience a real sense of I am doing exactly what I'm called to do. Why? Because To walk in God's will is to walk in your purpose. This is what he's done for you. And there's nothing more, wonderful in life to be walking in that which you know you're called to do. So it says here, talking about the idea of the paradox of the red cow and the ashes and the purification rite is that they defile the person that created it. That seemingly doesn't make any sense. How can something which brings purity and annihilates death can actually make someone impure? Well, we see this played out. We talk about some of the apostolic writings, and one of the apostolic writings, it says that he who knew no sin became sin that we might become the righteousness of God. Now, people look at Mashiach and they wonder, how can a divine Messiah become sinful? Well, the question is, and some of these questions don't have answers, by the way. Just like, how can somebody who is preparing a mixture which is going to bring purity, the highest level of purity, how is somebody who is making that mixture become defiled? How is that even possible? Well, we read, in other words, it says, the priest who prepare and administer the ashes must be prepared to leave the tabernacle precinct and become defiled, temporarily excluded from all things holy, in order to purify their fellow Jews. It is this altruistic self-sacrifice, the priest's willingness to transcend their personal interest, that elicits God's transcendent holiness and affects purification. In other words, a key element of the purification that comes upon the person who is being purified, a key aspect of that is the willingness of the priest to become defiled in the process. You could almost say that it's the priest who is, in effect, transferring their holiness and their purity to the person being purified. But nevertheless, the willingness of the priest to lose his purification temporarily is what it's saying here, is what elicits God's ability and willingness to purify the person. Now we're talking about a priest, one priest to a single individual in a single time. We step that up to the Mashiach, who was willing to temporarily leave his place of purity, his position of purity, in order that he might sanctify not just a person, but peoples, not just in his generation, but in future generations and in past generations. And as the Midrashim say, not just that, but even to purify those who were meant to be born, but were never born. In other words, the stillborn, or in our day and age, not just in our day and age, this has been happening for all days and ages, but even those little children who were aborted because of infanticide. Mashiach purifies them as well. Why? Because he was willing to temporarily become defiled himself. He who knew no sin became sin, that we might become the righteousness of God. We have to have this purification. To that, there's a comment in the ArtScroll Humash to chapter 19 and verse 13. It says, if someone became contaminated through a dead human and neglected to purify himself with the ashes of the red cow, even though he immersed himself in a mikvah, he remains in a state of contamination. Consequently, if he intentionally enters the sanctuary, the courtyard, he is subject to the heavenly punishment of charis, meaning that his soul is cut off from the Jewish people. In other words, a mikvah is not enough to eradicate death from our life. Some people say, well, do we need the Mashiach? We have all these other mitzvot. The sages have pointed out quite clearly that you could be someone who was perfectly righteous, that you did not ever sin. And yes, my friends, that is possible. It is possible to follow God's law entirely. Does it happen? No. In fact, the sages say that only 4 people in all of human history, not to include the Messiah, only 4 people, 5 you include the Messiah, which makes sense because 5 books of Torah, but I digress. Only 4 ever did this. But it can be done. Don't believe the theological lie that no one can keep God's law. That is a lie. And as I've said countless times before, if we believe that theology, then we are accusing Hashem of being an unjust God, has v'shalom. Why? Because that means that he gave us a law that he knew that we couldn't keep. And then when we didn't keep it, which he knew we couldn't, he punishes us for it. That is not a just judge. So the idea is, yes, you can keep the law. But even if you did, the sages point out, there are 4 people, again, 5 include the Mashiach, but 4 people who kept the law perfectly. However, they died only because of the sin of Adam. So you can see here that you could be a perfect Torah keeper, 100%, and you're still going to die because of the sin of Adam. Which means, my friends, there has to be an offering that is made outside of our ability to make it, that is going to affect our freedom from death. That, I submit to you, is the Messiah. Now, it says just another insight here to the concept of he who knew no sin. It says the Cohen, this is quoting from Rabbi Monk. This will be our last insight, and then we will share some. Obviously, tomorrow we'll have a third Aliyah. By the way, let me know in the comments here. I see people are commenting. Let me know if the video feed is better. It seems better on this end. It seems more clear, and but then again, I don't necessarily know when I'm doing it. So I pray that everybody's able to hear me okay and see me okay, and there's no distractions, because I don't want any these Aliyot today are too important to have distractions with technology. So anyway, it says the Cohen who mixed the water of purification became contaminated as if he had taken on the evil of the wicked nations, because there's a backstory to this talking about that the Para Aduma is representative in part of the wicked nations. So in other words, all of mankind. So it says the Cohen who mixed the water of purification became contaminated as if he had taken on the evil of the wicked nations in order to convert it to goodness. Evil is necessary as a means to provide the conversion to goodness. That's another paradox, my friends, isn't it? God doesn't want evil. God hates evil, right? But yet evil is necessary for conversion. We talk about the paganism of the nations and everything. I talked about this morning the insidiousness of the LBGT whatever movement, and that's so popular at a time. It's so sick. And then there's other things too, but that's just so perverse and so pervasive right now. But all of that evil is necessary in order to bring about the conversion of the nations of the world, representative by the priest who said here, did you catch this? The Cohen takes upon himself the wickedness of the nations. And finally, there's this relating to the tefillin. The ashes of the Para Aduma representing contamination were needed as a means to provide purification. Where the contamination of death appears, purity can be recovered through the procedure of the Para Aduma. However, it is not to be used wherever death is not accompanied by contamination. That is to say, according to the Zohar, at the death of the exceptionally righteous men who died by Hashem's kiss and whose bodies had not become contaminated. So there is a precedent here that some righteous men die and their bodies do not see contamination. Have my righteous anointed who did not see decay? That's Mashiach. It says the Zohar relates that when Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai explained these concepts, Rabbi Arba kissed him. And he talked about, Shimon Bar Yochai also observed that there is a parallel between the ritual of the paraduma and the tefillin. The end of the sinew used to sew the box of the tefillin must remain outside the box itself. You'll notice in the tefillin box, there's a little bit of cow sinew that is outside. It's like it looks like a little frayed edge, if you will, on the outside of the tefillin box. It represents the sin of the golden calf, which is the origin of all sin. It is to remain outside the box and not to be encapsulated within, for it would then accuse the righteous man who puts on tefillin, implying that sin is within him. The golden calf is the root of all sin. So the ox, the calf, which is why Messiah ben Yosef had to come and suffer for the sins of Israel, because Yosef is likened in scriptures to an ox, and an ox had to come and atone for an ox. End of our Aliyah today. We'll get into the death of Miriam tomorrow and explain some insights into that. Looks like everything is working out very well in this format. So, Bezrat Hashem, we will switch from Facebook Live to YouTube Live here on the Lapid Judaism page. And from now on, we'll do it this way. And prayerfully, that will work out just fantastic. So God bless you. Shalom. Blessings. We will see everybody tomorrow for the third Aliyah. Have a fantastic day.